On November 22nd, 2005, a huge chunk of console gamers had their first experience with a digital storefront with the launch of the Xbox 360. Once you created a gamer tag and got online, you could purchase digital games and download them to your hard drive or memory unit. Then came the Horse Armor cosmetic DLC, which then gave way to a more fully realized and impressive downloadable content. The blades became the new Xbox experience. Gamer pictures paved the way for avatar clothing. And those downloadable arcade games gave way to full games on demand. Looking back at the storefront on the Xbox 360, you can see every bump, nick, and scrape on a company just trying to figure out how all this stuff should work in a constantly evolving environment. Do you remember Microsoft points and how 80 points was the equivalent of $1? With the Xbox Live Indie Game Initiative, aspiring programmers could develop and publish their own games. Full, multi-gigabyte games were downloadable to a hard drive for the first time on a console. Of course, who can forget Kinect, where your body is the controller? Games being delisted and then removed from an online store due to lapsed rights or licensing changing hands became reality. The Xbox Live Marketplace's library of games and apps feature lesson after lesson of what worked and what didn't work in the video game industry in the last nearly 2 decades. Now, on July 29, 2024, you'll no longer be able to purchase games from the store on the Xbox 360. If you're like me, you've surely built up a sizable digital library on your 360. I could sit here and be like, oh, buy this or buy that before the store goes down. But you know what? I think it's way more interesting to step back and just look at the tapestry of games on your hard drive and how they represent a winding road of progress and regression. So here's what's on my Xbox 360 as the digital store is laid to rest. Okay, so we have got a lot of ground to cover here. I've accumulated a ton of stuff on my Xbox 360 hard drive since I bought the system in 2007. From downloadable content, to demos, to backwards compatible original Xbox games, and of course, live arcade games and full 360 games. Some stuff I played a lot, and other stuff, none at all. And some things I ended up buying during the production of this episode. Also, don't go thinking that the games shown in this episode are going bye-bye when the 360 store goes down. A vast majority of these are playable in plenty of other ways. Physical compilation discs, Xbox One and Series console backwards compatibility, ports to newer platforms, and, of course, on PC. There's honestly less to panic about here than when the Wii, Wii U, and 3DS shops went down. So before we get into those Xbox Live Arcade games, I gotta mention Hexic HD. If you bought an Xbox 360 with a hard drive, then you had the hexagon matching puzzler pre-installed. Unless this was really your jam, I bet a lot of people have this in their game libraries and have totally forgotten they even have it or where they even got it in the first place. I know I sure did. So, one of the most brilliant moves that Microsoft made was to mandate that all live arcade games include a trial version that will eventually prompt you to purchase it after you reach a certain point. Some games, these demos were more generous than others, but that approach certainly got me to buy a bunch of games that I'd never even considered. I got hooked early on by twin stick shooters, where the left analog stick would move and the right stick is used to shoot in any direction. These sorts of games felt right at home with the Xbox 360's controller and the staggered stick placement. Geometry Wars Retro Evolved from Bizarre Creations was the game that really both sold me on the resurgence of this type of gameplay, but also the potential of Xbox Live Arcade. Although I ended up buying an Xbox 360 myself so I could play Gears of War, I spent significantly more time with this. As the game gets more and more intense, I just love how you get to a point where you're just driven by pure motor skills, doing things before your mind can even register what's happening. Geometry Wars Retro Evolved 2 took the same basic idea and expanded it with new game types, score multipliers, and enemies. And a resolution and graphical boost, of course. It's just as good, if not better than the original, but it didn't hook me in quite the same way. I really liked the pick up and play simplicity of one game mode and competing with your friends' high scores. And here, that formula felt spread too thin across too many game modes. Assault Heroes mixes Konami's Jackal with the ability to get out of your vehicle and run around on foot. Two-player co-op probably added a lot here, but I honestly didn't play this that much. Heavy Weapon from PopCap Games applies twin-stick shooting with Galaga and Moon Patrol, and it had me pretty hooked for a little bit. Actually, this game reminds me of a game that I would play at my dad's house on his Apple II called Wavy Navy. Since Microsoft had already spent a lot of time setting up the online multiplayer infrastructure of Xbox Live in the previous generation, most live arcade games shipped with some sort of online component, whether it was the previously mentioned leaderboards or competitive and cooperative multiplayer. There was a period of time where playing with other people was hugely alluring to me. Bomberman Live just makes sense. A good online multiplayer Bomberman seems like a given, although I'm no expert on what's good in this series. But you know what, this doesn't seem all that bad. A lack of backwards compatibility and a dead online player pool means that this will go quietly into the night, and I'm not sure if many are going to really miss it. Pac-Man Championship Edition surprised the heck out of me when I played it, because up until that point, I just assumed that it was impossible to iterate on and evolve Pac-Man's gameplay in any meaningful way. But dang, they sure as heck did it here. This is a game that can stand shoulder to shoulder with the original. It's simple, challenging, and rewarding in a similar way to me as Geometry Wars is. And much like that, the sequel, Pac-Man Championship Edition DX, which was later updated to DX Plus, suffers from spreading the idea too thinly. There's just a ton of levels, modes, and graphical styles here, but it's the changes like time slowing down when you're about to get caught by a ghost that dilutes the gameplay just enough to make it less compelling to me. Maybe that's an unpopular opinion, but I sure as heck did play this one a lot less than the original CE. This era also gave rise to the hyper-challenging, precision-based obstacle course genre. Leading the charge was Trials HD, a new addition in a popular Flash game series, which I'd never played. But Trials HD intrigued me from the very first time I played the demo. It definitely has some pretty wonky physics that are both infuriating and hilarious. So I ended up playing a lot of it, but it sure did test my patience at times.
Super Meat Boy!
But of course, it was truly the independently developed Super Meat Boy that brought this genre to the next level. I never finished this, and to be honest, I find the prospect of doing so a little scary. So I'll just sit back here and appreciate what this did for indie games in general. I guess new reports of this changed the soundtrack, which miffed a lot of fans, but the 360 version here still has the original. Explosion Man from Twisted Pixel is more up my alley on the challenge meter. The zany main character is humorous, if a little obnoxious by today's standards. The way that humans die shooting out a geyser of stakes instead of blood is much funnier than I remember it being. In theory, I like the idea of online multiplayer board games like Carcassonne, or Carcassonne, I don't know. But in practice, I really never ended up playing this all that much. I don't even remember how to play this when I was capturing footage for this episode. But you know what? At least I can revisit this via the Xbox One's backwards compatibility. On the other hand, Catan, or the electronic version of the Settlers of Catan board game, was a bit more fun for me, although I don't remember how to play that either. This version has been delisted from Xbox Live, so you can't buy it anymore. But further enhanced versions and editions have been released on newer platforms. Uno, the ultimate casual multiplayer game. I spent a ton of time with this one. One time, I even spent an entire day, like 8 hours, playing with the same group of people as I was recovering from a hangover. Once the game was updated with Xbox Live camera support, well, people were going to do what they were going to do with that. Although this version has been delisted and replaced with newer editions, I still think that this is the best rendition that I've played. Maybe I'm not alone because as I was capturing footage, I was surprised to find someone else playing multiplayer too. Pinball FX was my introduction to realistic video pinball. Maybe the physics and tables are true to life, but I was immediately turned off by the lack of tactile feedback. Maybe I'm crazy because it all feels so hollow to me, like the ball has no weight to it. I don't even remember why I even bought this in the first place, because I remember feeling this way just playing the demo. I did recently find out that Pinball FX was delisted to make way for the more complete Pinball FX 2. Owners of the original could import the tables into the sequel at no additional cost. But, I still don't like it. When it comes to balls of steel, Peggle is more up my alley. Remember this? It was such a big deal that PopCap put this game on the 360. I hadn't played this in years until this video, and it is still real fun. I checked to see if there was a phone version of it because that seems like a great way to play it now. But alas, it looks like EA killed it with ads and microtransactions in a game called Peggle Blast. Blah. Aegis Wing was a freebie given out by Microsoft in 2007. It's a 4-player side-scrolling shooter that was developed by some interns at Microsoft. And honestly, it shows. But you know what? It's a novel concept, and because 4-player shooters certainly wasn't something you'd see very often, I really appreciated the effort. Although the levels are a bit too long, and they all look the same, and you know, that music never really gets you hyped like a shooter soundtrack should. But I ain't gonna complain here, especially since it was free. I'm willing to bet that a lot of people out there had this one on their 360's hard drive. It's also playable on Xbox One and Series consoles. On the topic of free games, remember the advert games, or I don't know, advertisement games? They were meant to promote a product, but really people just downloaded to boost their gamer score. The 2007 Yaris game takes inspiration from the commercials for the Toyota Yaris subcompact cars and has you barreling down pipe-like tracks with a tentacle that comes out of the hood. Yeah. This was delisted from Xbox Live after about a year. Doritos Dash of Destruction is essentially a game of tag between delivery vans and T-Rexes. Drive around, collect bags of Doritos, get 200 gamer points, and never play it again. Does anyone out there that has this in their library actually not have all the achievements? Undertow, an interesting tower defense / shooter / strategy game, was given out for free to Xbox Live subscribers after the service went down during the holidays in 2007. I never really gave this one much of a chance, but revisiting it now, it's much more ambitious than I originally thought it was. So this doesn't really count as a free game, but I won a download code for Rascals during a Twitter contest on New Year's Eve of 2010. Developed by Half Brick Studios, who are probably most famous for Jetpack Joyride and Fruit Ninja, Rascals is an intriguing amalgamation of gameplay concepts: racing, platforming, block puzzles, and more, with a slapdash of Mr. Driller on top for flavor. Despite how antiquated the graphical style seems today, I'd forgotten how awesome this game really is, and it's playable on Xbox Series systems. If there's one thing the XBLA was perfect for, it was emulating and repackaging classic games with a bunch of modern trimmings like leaderboards and online co-op. At this point in time, it's important to remember that developers were still figuring out how to bring classic games to the HD era and how they should be represented. So they were just throwing a bunch of different approaches and graphical tricks at the wall to see what would stick. Considering how many collections of emulated games they developed over the past couple of generations, I don't think that anyone was better equipped to bring classic games to download services than Digital Eclipse, Backbone Entertainment, and other studios under the Foundation 9 umbrella. The $5 price tag that many of these came with made it easier to stomach buying them piecemeal. Most of their earliest releases, mainly Midway and Williams arcade games, all used a similar menu system, but whether or not they would get the HD treatment varied from game to game. Joust, the 1982 arcade game where you fly ostriches around and try to lance other players, was the perfect fit for online multiplayer because of its relative pick-up and playability. Revisiting it now, I'm surprised that the classic graphics aren't run through a bilinear filter, because sharp pixels at the time equals bad. The enhanced HD graphics are used sparingly, like the floating islands and players have them, while the ground doesn't for some reason. A cavernous background fills the normally black void behind the character. This style of HD characters don't strike me as all that awkward, and I think it fits naturally within the style of the game. Root Beer Tapper, the family-friendly edition of Tapper, has you tossing mugs of beverages to an ever-encroaching mob of patrons. I had a little stint where I'd play this game frequently at Barcade in Brooklyn, although I was never very good at it. No HD enhanced graphics and a forced background meant that this is a pretty bare bones ordeal. However, I do like that you can use the right analog stick as a tap, making it feel like the arcade game. This has been delisted from the service, which reveals an annoying reality. A bunch of games that had multiplayer components had a habit of including online achievements, like winning 5 Xbox Live matches. Especially for delisted and non-backwards compatible games, these achievements will now be impossible to get. Of course, a couple of iconic twin-stick shooters made their appearances on the service, although they've both been delisted now. Robotron 2084 is one of the greatest games of all time and has original graphics as well as 2 enhanced modes, one of which replaces the player, enemy, and humans with more detailed characters, and a second one that does that, as well as adding a background. The new graphics look a little goofy by today's standards, but I wouldn't say they ruin it.
Let's go!
Smash TV was the gameplay successor to Robotron, and is still just as hard as I remember. Lots of gore, guns, and gifts to collect, but I think that its true legacy is the woo, yeah, and bingo voice samples.
Bingo! Yeah!
Ugh, and it looks like Digital Eclipse has decided to start forcing bilinear filtering on their releases.
Round 1, fight!
Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 takes the arcade game and puts it on Xbox Live Arcade, where there was plenty of competition laying in wait. A forced bilinear filter is annoying, but more obnoxious to me is the oddly numbered achievement points. So while Ultimate MK was delisted to make way for the Mortal Kombat Arcade Collection, most of the Williams and Midway games are on the 2012 Midway Arcade Origins disc. That collection has various screen sizes and filtering options, including sharp modes, but it doesn't include any of the high-definition sprites that were in the XBLA releases. Digital Eclipse / Backbone Entertainment also handled a slew of Konami arcade games. Contra was actually the very first game I downloaded on Xbox Live. I hadn't played the arcade version since I was in high school, and I don't think that I'd ever made it past the first level in that version. You know, I'd always assumed that it was completely different from the NES game Beyond Level 1, but it's actually closer than I thought it would be. I'd never played the arcade version of Super Contra until its XBLA release, and it's a similar situation to the first. It's closer to the NES game than I expected, except with bigger, lankier character sprites. Russian Attack is part of a small, exclusive group of games about taking out an entire army with a knife. Gyruss is Konami's take on Space Invaders and Galaga, but switches the perspective behind the ship. It ain't bad at all, and you can rotate your ship around the entire screen. Each one of these games shares the same menu layout and feature sets in the same way that the early Williams and Midway games did, except with a Konami-themed aesthetic. Each game has an enhanced graphics mode, which looks about as bad as you'd expect. Well, except Russian Attack, which is bad, but it doesn't look like it was simply run through a filter. Instead, the enhanced graphics are created and then run through a filter. Sticking with original graphics style yields sharp results, but there's scrolling shimmer in each. Well, except Gyruss because of its perspective. This is adjustable, so it could be corrected, but the controls for doing so are so touchy that I would be shocked if anyone could get it dialed in perfectly. On the other hand, the enhanced sound is pretty good, with remixed music and sound effects. As a lover of the arcade version of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I woke up early to download the XBLA version of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the arcade game '89, when it released. Ubisoft had the rights to the property at the time, coinciding with the release of the CG animated TMNT movie, but they were able to work out some agreement with Konami to release this. Not only is this a pretty good version visually, with sharp graphics, etc., it also had 4-player online co-op and retained all the voices and music from the arcade game, something that Konami themselves couldn't even achieve with the unlockable versions in their PS2, GameCube, and Xbox reboot games. Backbone also did some of the other multiplayer Konami arcade releases, The Simpsons and X-Men. I didn't buy The Simpsons for whatever reason, but they got me with
X-Men.
Outside of forced character artwork and smoothing and filtering, this was a great version. You could even choose between 4 and 6-player versions, the latter of which is complete with an ultra-wide screen layout to mimic the dual monitor setup of the arcade cabinet. As you'd expect, all 3 of these games are delisted now, so if you haven't bought them, you can't get them. Last on the list of Konami/Digital Eclipse crossover games, we have Castlevania Symphony of the Night. This was a pretty big deal when it released in 2010. I remember reading somewhere that the Xbox Live Arcade file size limitations were lifted because of this game. But also, this game was still only available on the PlayStation 1 in the US, so suddenly the menu of classic games that could possibly appear on XBLA expanded to include a lot of people's wildest imaginations. In all, it's a decent port, but the forced filtering hurts it a bit. But hey, it's also playable on 1 and Series consoles.
You seem human, and yet, what do you here?
I've come to destroy this castle.
Sega also handed off a few arcade and Genesis titles to Digital Eclipse for development. Golden Axe, Sonic the Hedgehog, Streets of Rage 2, and more, all hit under the Sega Vintage Collection. These all run in the same emulator and graphical interface, complete with ugly graphical enhancement modes, forced filtering, and occasionally wonky sound effects. Still, I had long dreamed of playing the arcade version of Golden Axe at home, so they got me there. These seem to be removed and delisted to make way for the vastly superior M2 developed Sega Vintage collections on the store. The Golden Axe, Monster World, and Streets of Rage collections ended up in my library, and they are well worth it. Each one has 3 games, good emulation, numerous screen modes, audio jukeboxes, and challenge modes. And hey, they're even playable on Xbox One and Series systems. Can't beat that. One-on-one fighting games and the competition that they entailed was what many thought of when they were presented with the possibilities of an online ecosystem on consoles. Street Fighter II was a given, and the release of Turbo Hyper Fighting was heavily hyped up at the time. In my memory, I thought this was a Backbone port, but the honor belongs to a developer called Sensory Sweep. It's pretty bare bones: arcade, local, and Xbox Live versus modes, as well as a training mode. Filtered graphics are a bummer, and there's a weirdly animated background, a practice that you don't see anywhere. I don't remember if the lag was bad when it comes to the online, although I'm willing to bet that it probably wasn't great. Capcom released a number of their fighting games digitally towards the end of the generation. The only one that I have here is Darkstalkers Resurrection, which has the arcade versions of 2 and 3 included. The entire package is pretty fleshed out with plenty of unlockables, expansive training and tutorial modes, and of course, screen options. I have to laugh about them calling this filter crisp. Sure.
For here, the mighty
Garou, Mark of the Wolves is one of SNK's finest moments, and after I'd long sold my Dreamcast copy, this was an easy buy. It's a pretty good version.
Battle Coliseum
Was SNK's attempt to create an equivalent to Capcom's Versus series. The character lineup is pretty interesting, with Marco from Metal Slug even making an appearance. The 3D backgrounds are fine, but the character sprites, they just look weird, man.
KO! You win!
Mission complete!
2 games that didn't quite fit anywhere else in this section are Namco's Galaga, which was developed in-house and seems to be a decent version, even though I haven't really played it that much. Atari packaged Centipede and its sequel, Millipede, into a bundle, which has original graphics and a really bizarre-looking modern graphic mode. And lastly, there's the long-delisted arcade version of Double Dragon. This is a fascinating release that I'd long forgotten about until I was doing this video. I couldn't stop laughing at the weirdest, better-than-bad HD art for the characters. At least you can disable it, but I sort of don't want to. I sort of enjoy reveling in the complete ugliness of it. Honestly, one of the biggest benefits of a digital store with relatively low development overhead is that it provided an interesting testbed for companies to revive long-dormant games and franchises. Whether it was a reboot, remaster, or remake, an amazing amount of classic series were given a new chance at life and to find a new audience. Some were successful, others not so much. I've bought Bionic Commando Rearmed 3 times now. First on the PlayStation 3, then on Steam, and now on the Xbox 360 when it was just $1.50. I don't know why this game never had a physical release, nor is it even backwards compatible on newer systems. Doing so would have made short work of the rampant screen tearing in the 360 version. But still, this is just a great, loving homage to the original NES game with some awesome, awesome tunes. Here's one that I only found out about recently, and I was too curious not to buy it for cheap in the lead up to the store closure. Russian Attack Expatriate. A re-envisioning of the original game brought to life by Czech developer Vatra. It's not great, but I'm more impressed that this was even made in the first place. In Unreal Engine 3, no less. I can't imagine anyone was really chomping at the bit for a Russian Attack reboot, but this is an interesting curiosity. A much better and well-deserving reboot was Capcom's Strider in 2014. Which, of course, like everything else, expands into the Metroidvania genre. I like this a lot when I played it around release on the PlayStation 4, which runs at 60 FPS, while this one runs at 30. The perpetual scanline overlay is a bit obnoxious because it makes it seem like you're witnessing the entire game through a surveillance camera. Actually, you know what, that's sort of cool, but it doesn't really look that great. Still, it was about $1.50 before the store closed, so I thought I'd show one last vote of support. I mean, let's be real. When it drops in the Kazakh music from the NES game out of nowhere, that alone makes it worth it. Up next on the Rebootathon is the aggressively boring Rocket Knight. No idea what happened here, and I would be surprised if anyone thought it was a worthy setup to even Sparkster. I do think, after playing this, that it would be worth trying to revive the series again, though. Choplifter HD is a game that I bought as the store was approaching closure, because I had no idea that it even existed prior to this. I really love the game on the Sega Master System, but I never played any of the sequels, like Choplifter 3 on the SNES. Which reminds me, what even happened to Choplifter 2? Anyway, this is unexpectedly cool, a pleasant surprise, and treats the subject with integrity. Jetpack Refueled was clearly a passion project for Rare, who wanted to update one of their earliest games. I never played the original ZX Spectrum game, which, surprise, surprise, but this remake had me hooked for a spell back when it was originally launched in 2007. It was later included in Rare Replay, but I'm unsure if there's any difference between that game and this one besides dashboard icons. I love that legendary Japanese developer Treasure remastered several of their games for XBLA. Guardian Heroes, the multiplayer beat-em-up for the Sega Saturn, came out in 2011, and that's pretty great for fans of the original. It has a pretty poor-looking enhanced graphical mode with some pencil shading on it, but thankfully it's completely optional. The game in general has been formatted for widescreen, and the extra real estate is quite welcome, seeing that there's a lot going on at times. And then we've got the 1-2 punch of Radiant Silvergun and Ikaruga, two of the most iconic vertical shooters of all time. Although I prefer Ikaruga, it's more of a straight port of the Dreamcast and GameCube versions, just at a higher resolution. This same HD version has been brought to newer platforms, including physicals for the Switch and PS4. However, Radiant Silvergun, the much sought after and expensive Saturn game, got the red carpet port treatment here. I'd forgotten just how many options and just stuff there is here. I really should have played this more, and I'm kicking myself for it now. Graphical modes, none of which really destroy the original style, an arcade mode and story mode, and it was great to finally get this game with an official translation on XBLA, but even sweeter is that that version was then brought to the Switch and released physically. Ugh, it kills me that I didn't buy Bang-I-Oh Missile Fury HD before it was delisted without notice in 2021. At least I have the demo on my system to remind me of it, but that just goes to show you. You just never know when something might just suddenly disappear.
Afterburner Climax.
Now we're talking. Everyone knows how much of a Sega mark I am at this point, and this true sequel to Afterburner 2 is everything I could have ever wanted from such a game. It's the perfect arcade experience and is faithfully recaptured at home with this port, minus the hydraulic seat of the arcade game, of course. It's gorgeous, fast, and you can complete it in around like 10 to 15 minutes. There's a bunch of unlockable EX options that can be toggled to give you unlimited missiles, climax meter, and other stuff. I bought this game on the PS3 as well, and I'm really glad I did, because it's been delisted. That is a real travesty if you ask me. Also tragically delisted, Outrun Online Arcade, a port of the incredible Outrun 2. While not as iconic as the original, I think this sequel is a lot more fun, which may or may not be a spicy opinion. Like Afterburner Climax, this just looks incredible in HD, and plays just as good. The only real downside is that this is more of a truncated version of Outrun 2 Coast to Coast, but a fuller game than vanilla Outrun 2. This was certainly delisted because of the lapsed Ferrari license, but come on Sega, do something.
Let's start! Yeah! Woohoo! Oh yeah! Woohoo! You're so cool!
Nights into Dreams HD is a port of the Japanese exclusive PlayStation 2 version, and is a great way for people to check this game out. The HD graphics look good, but Saturn Nights mode looks sorta awful, with filters and forced borders. This game is a tough nut to crack though. You might feel tempted to finish each lap as quickly as possible, but the key is to blow up the orb and then collect as many extra points as you can and then return to the goal before the time runs out. It's easily misunderstood, but it's fun once you get the hang of it. If nothing else, play it for the exemplary soundtrack. Soft Museum is an all-timer as far as I'm concerned. Never has there been a game that I wanted to love so much but simply could not figure out how to play it well than Virtual On Oratorio Tangram. The controls are so unorthodox that I'll say that I love it, but the truth is, I've never been able to play this well. The thing that really keeps me coming back is that gosh darn soundtrack. It is so good. Beyond Good and Evil HD was on sale for a couple of bucks at one point, and I had some store credit that was about to expire, so why the heck not? I had this on the PlayStation 3 already, but this one is backwards compatible with the Xbox One. I'm not sure if this is considered a good version now, or if it's largely skippable between the originals and the new 20th Anniversary Edition release. The original Prince of Persia is a game that I've played the first 8 screens of countless times over the years, and yet I'd never moved beyond that until I got Prince of Persia Classic on XBLA. This remake adapts the aesthetic of Sands of Time and it works, so I think that this seems like a pretty good way to experience Prince of Persia, but I am hardly an expert on how it fully compares to the original.
Hydro Thunder! Hurricane!
My first time playing Hydro Thunder was at the Village Casino in Bemis Point, New York. The bass on that machine when you used your boost felt like it was going to make the whole place fall down. Home versions, including the sequel Hydro Thunder Hurricane on XBLA, simply can't deliver on this experience. But still, this is a fun game that fits in naturally within the Thunder lineage.
The ramp is up.
I remember tons of people freaking out about how good Space Invaders Extreme was supposed to be on the Nintendo DS. I didn't have time for it there, but if it pops up for download on XBLA, then I'm going to give it a try. Space Invaders Extreme HD is a more frantic version of Space Invaders. The original had row after row of aliens slowly marching towards you, but Extreme doles out smaller encounters at a rapid pace with the occasional boss fight. In my mind, remaking Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Turtles in Time seems like an easy win. Alas, I was just looking for an excuse to show Turtles in Time Reshelled, a totally botched remake. I didn't buy this garbage, but I will keep the demo around to remind myself that there is no such thing as an easy remake. I'll tell you, compared to some of these remakes and reskins that we've seen, Bubble Bobble Neo is positively delightful visually, and that classic theme music retains all of its original charm. It includes the 200 original levels for 2 players, but also has new arranged levels that can be enjoyed for up to 4 players. This remake was also available on WiiWare under the name Bubble Bobble Plus, but if you want to play it in HD, then the 360 seems to be your only opportunity right now. It's also not backwards compatible on the Xbox One, so this is one of many games that will be unobtainable via traditional means in the future. The same goes for Puzzle Bobble Live. While this is far from an underrepresented series in just about every generation since it was first released, it's still sad to see this version go. I really like the ethereal Klonoa-like soundtrack here. And once again, we have a whole bunch of online achievements. So annoying. A trio of first-person shooters round out this segment on remakes, remasters, and reboots. A port of Doom was a given here, since it's on everything. But this version was my first time playing it with a dual analog controller, and I was actually in heaven. Or hell, I guess. Sure, I didn't finish the game at the time, but playing it in this way felt like the most accessible and sensible to me. If you're a big fan of the Bungie era of Halo, then you'll surely appreciate Marathon Durandal, a remaster of one of their earliest games that was released on the Mac back in 1995. I haven't played much of this, but I really should. It's more story focused for the era, which is pretty neat considering that it preceded Half-Life by a number of years. There's a ton of options here to tailor the game, including HD graphical enhancements that look pretty nice.
Welcome to Quake Arena Arcade.
And Quake Arena Arcade is more or less the closest thing to a remaster of Quake 3 that we've gotten to date. If you remember, Quake 3 was a famously multiplayer-only game at the time, although you could play with bots if you wanted to. That's pretty much what you get here, and it has most of the maps from other versions. Curiously, this version does have its own single-player campaign that tells a little bit of a story. And that might make it more appealing considering that the online ecosystem for this is completely dead, despite being backwards compatible on 1 and Series consoles.
Taking the lead.
It can't be understated just how huge of an impact the success of the Nintendo Wii had on the game industry as a whole. In 2008, Microsoft launched the new Xbox experience, which revamped the efficient blade layout of the Xbox dashboard into something a bit bubblier, friendlier, and Nintendo-esque, if you will. Oh, and don't forget to create your avatar after you upgrade. So for all the pushback that the visuals of the new Xbox experience had, there were quite a few new key features under the hood and new sections of the store that made the upgrade worth it. The XNA Creators Club, or Xbox Live Indie Games, featured community-created games that were developed using Microsoft's XNA Game Studio. My first introduction to this service was Pizzong, a game from friend of the channel Dave Voiles. He was learning to code at the time, and this was one of his first creations. It's a Pong clone, in case you didn't notice. But the biggest games that I grabbed from the indie section are the ports of Zeboyd Games' first 2 RPGs, Breath of Death 7 and Cthulhu Saves the World. Both are basic 8-bit style RPGs with, era-appropriate dialogue. You know, when it was really popular to be self-aware while throwing in some references to beloved games, such as Castlevania Symphony of the Night and Resident Evil 4. It's interesting to look at these and see the team of Robert Boyd and William Sternberg learn the ropes of making classic-style RPGs, refining the battle system and telling a better story. These are fairly short games, around 4 or 5 hours. From here, Zeboyd Games would go on to make some really charming RPGs like Cosmic Star Heroine and This Way Madness Lies. Another major enhancement was the ability to install game discs to the hard drive, which would not only save on wear and tear of your discs and drive, but also reduces loading times. Once this was possible, selling full games for download was honestly a no-brainer. Believe it or not, I only bought one game on demand for the longest time, and that was Burnout Paradise. Even though I had it physically on the PlayStation 3, I bought it on the 360 to play online with my friend Justin. And then, we only played it once. Oh well, this is an awesome game and well worth playing now, although you'll probably opt for playing the remastered version on modern consoles. Over the years, I've accumulated other games on demand via other means, though. After backwards compatibility was revealed for the Xbox One, it wasn't uncommon for digital 360 games to be given away with the developer's new release, or with new entries in whatever series. These could be downloaded on either the Xbox 360 or Xbox One. For instance, Quantum Break on the Xbox One came with a free download of the Xbox 360 version of Alan Wake. Gears of War 4 and Gears 5 included vouchers for Gears of War 2, Gears of War 3, and Gears of War Judgment. Sometimes, a deal is too good to pass up. I've bought several games on demand entries in recent years because they were only a couple bucks. And even though I will likely play them through their enhanced backwards compatible versions, I still have them installed on my 360, because why not? Too Human, the infamous hack and slash from Silicon Knights, might have been $1 or $2 at some point. This game has super weird controls where you use the right analog stick to swing your sword. Sonic Generations and Sonic Unleashed were on sale at some point, and I actually really bought these so I could play their much enhanced versions on the Xbox Series X. I barely played Unleashed, but Generations remains the only modern-style Sonic game that I've finished myself post-Sonic Adventure 2. Although I had it on disc, I bought Namco's Tales of Vesperia for $1 or $2 at some point. Of course, at the time, it was Xbox exclusive, and I wanted to do whatever I could to support RPGs on the 360. It didn't really help, but this is still the best Tales game that I've played to date. Several games that I picked up for cheap as the 360 store barreled towards shutdown are as follows. Alone in the Dark, yet another reboot in this long-running series that can't seem to catch on fully, no matter how hard they try. Remember Me from Capcom. For as many third-person action games that hit that generation, this one seems underappreciated with a cool melee battle system. $2 for this? Why not? I've never played the original version of Devil May Cry 4, only the remastered PS4 version. For $1.99, it doesn't hurt to have this in case I need to reference it for something. The same goes for DMC, the late-gen Devil May Cry reboot. It clearly was too much for the hardware. And who knows, maybe I'll need to make a comparison between this and the definitive version someday down the road. It's only $2. Black is a guns blazing original Xbox game from Criterion, who must have been inspired by their Burnout games and decided not to stay in their own lane here. It seems quaint by today's standards, but I'd much rather play this than just about any Call of Duty game. Although original Xbox backwards compatibility on the 360 wasn't exactly amazing, they at least attempted to make it work for some of the best games on that system. You pop in your original disc, and it'll download a little patch, and you're in. I hope these patches don't go away when the store goes down. In fact, I wonder if patches will be an issue because a lot of the times the Xbox 360 doesn't save the patches to the hard drive, just in a cache. I hope you didn't think I was done with XBLA games yet, did you? Because once the data size limitations were lifted, then we started to see some really amazing stuff. Braid was the indie darling from Jonathan Blow, which was a really big deal at the time. I thought it was alright, but it didn't grab me like it did a lot of other people. This version is backwards compatible, but recently a remastered anniversary edition was released as well. It's just too bad that Jonathan Blow seems to be anti-physical release, because I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that would love to have this game that way. Brothers, A Tale of Two Sons is an early game from Joseph Fares, creator of the inventive A Way Out and It Takes Two. The control scheme takes a little bit of getting used to, but it carries the same charm as those other games. This one has gotten physical releases on the Xbox One and PlayStation 4. Bastion was the game that put Supergiant Games on the map. I played this one back in 2011, while I was recovering from having a pilonidal cyst removed. What's that? Let's not talk about it, and hey, don't look it up, okay? But yeah, Bastion is good stuff all around. I love the narration in this. It got a physical release on the PlayStation 4, and I should probably replay that.
And then he falls to his death. I'm just fooling. Good news is the emergency defenses still work. Bad news is they're aiming for the kid.
Castle Crashers from the Behemoth was a huge deal when it was released and helped pave the way for a wider acceptance of digital download games in 2008. Originally an Xbox 360 exclusive, this has now been ported or remastered across just about everything. And finally, getting a physical release on the Nintendo Switch in 2023. But before the Behemoth did Castle Crashers, there was the run-and-gun Alien Hominid. This came out during the previous generation, but the new HD version, Alien Hominid HD, was a nice update. This is backwards compatible on the Xbox One and Series consoles, where it's been renamed Alien Hominid 360. I just wish I liked this one more, but maybe I can blame the 360's pretty much universally shoddy D-pad. Alan Wake's American Nightmare was an action-focused spin-off that seemed to be console exclusive on the 360, but also available on the PC. It being backwards compatible on Xbox One is nice, but it wasn't included in the package with the remaster versions of Alan Wake for some reason. I wish it was, but at least there's still ways that you can play this. Would it be glib of me to say that Shadow Complex, the Unreal Engine-based Metroidvania, pretty much single-handedly revived the genre in 2009. Even now, this feels pretty unique. What with a dual-stick aim and move control scheme, occasionally fighting enemies in the foreground and background, and a more realistic real-world setting. The frame rate chugs at times, but Shadow Complex has been remastered and runs a lot better on PS4, Xbox One, and PC. 2012's Dust, an Elysian tale, mixes Metroidvania-style exploration, well-animated anthropomorphic cat-like creatures, and combo-based hack-and-slash swordplay, and their end result is pretty spectacular. I'm realizing now that I remember very little about this game because I probably rushed through it at the time. Sign More is a fantastical 2.5D shooter with anthropomorphic bulls. How's that for a concept? Sweeping camera angles and bullet time slowdown mechanics aside, this feels like a 32-bit era shooter at its core. Akira Yamaoka of Silent Hill fame heads up the sound department, and it's a largely ambient affair, which works for how moody the game is, but it doesn't get the blood pumping like a good shooter should. It looks and runs great on the 360 and sports a cinematic aspect ratio. An expanded edition called Cymora EX hit the next-gen consoles, which bumps up the resolution, adds in new levels, has an English voiceover dub, and it has an option to turn off the cinematic aspect ratio. But I'd rather keep it. 12 years after the release of indie game Fez, far from the controversy of designer Phil Fish saying that recent, as of 2012, Japanese games sucked. Then there was Twitter meltdowns, the announcement and cancellation of a sequel, and I'm just sitting here in awe, amazed at just how good this game is in nearly every aspect. The graphical style, music, themes, exploratory gameplay. This is a special game that inspired countless indie developers to make the game that they'd always wanted to exist. Too bad this never got a console physical, but at least it was quietly put on the Nintendo Switch in 2021. Limbo is a mood. Starting as an Xbox 360 exclusive and released during the summer of 2010, the atmosphere in this game is thick as heck. The grainy, fading black and white projection feels like it could drown in darkness at any moment. It's simultaneously beautiful and creepy with moments of intense violence. Limbo can be completed in a single sitting, which is hardly a knock against it. I really like Klee's Shank games, but they were operating on a whole other level with Marc of the Ninja. The stealthy, shadow-based gameplay works surprisingly well, although it can be pretty hard to see what the heck is going on at times. Owners of this game on XBLA were given an automatic update to Marc of the Ninja Remastered on Xbox One when it released in 2018. In that version, it is a lot easier to keep track of your ninja in 4K. I personally don't have much to say about Minecraft because I've never really played it all that much myself. But my kiddos got way into this version during COVID. I love that their first worlds are preserved here. And one day, maybe they can revisit them and get the same kind of joy from that as I get from loading up old save files in Final Fantasy III. Burnout Crash is a weird little game inspired by the world of Burnout where you bounce a car around and try to destroy as much property as possible. It kinda stinks, but it was 50 cents. And you know what? That is a price that I will gladly pay for the use of the song Crash by the Primitives that's used throughout the game. Like Treasure, I felt like I needed to support cave shooters that appeared on the 360 when I could. Although I imported the physical Mushihime-sama Futari early on and loved Akai Katana, I let the XBLA release of Guwang language for far longer than I should have. This seems to be one of their lesser ported games, and I guess I can see why. There doesn't seem to be anything really all that special about it, outside of the Xbox 360 mode, letting you use the right analog stick to control your Shikigami. I put Dust Force into the same bin as Super Meat Boy. It's a challenging, obstacle-based speedrun game where you control one of 4 janitors as they sweep up bushels of leaves. So, less gore than Super Meat Boy. This seemingly unloved game was published by Capcom, and I think that it's a real treat for anybody who missed out on it, myself included, until I bought it for 99 cents. I was actually face-slapped by the incredible soundtrack by Lifeformed, who also did the soundtrack for Tunic. That alone is worth the 99 cents. Digital download games are the perfect place for spin-offs and gap fillers, like Dead Space Ignition, which bridges the gap between the first and second games. I don't know what they were going for here because it feels hastily made and isn't compelling at all. It's really just mini-games strung together by motion comic scenes that honestly look like they were scribbled in a journal before being colored in. Did any Dead Space fans want this or like it? Batman Arkham Origins Blackgate was originally a portable-centric take on the Arkham games, appearing on the 3DS and PlayStation Vita systems. Narratively, this takes place a few months after Arkham Origins. The deluxe version appeared on HD systems the following year with, as far as I could tell, very little fanfare. Based on my little playtime thus far, it does seem to do a pretty decent job at reproducing the hand-to-hand combat and stealth aspects of the fully 3D games. Castlevania Lords of Shadow Mirror of Fate is in a similar situation, except it was a Nintendo 3DS exclusive for about 8 months. Bridging the gap between Lords of Shadow 1 and 2, this stars far more popular legacy characters, Simon, Alucard, and Trevor. I haven't played very far into this, so I can't comment much on its quality beyond initial impressions, which is that it ain't bad, and I wonder if developing this was to help Mercury Stream land the Metroid 2 remake gig. So here's the point in the video where things really go off the rails. I guess there was a point when I had a curated library, but if you were an Xbox Live Gold member after the launch of the One, then I'm sure you're familiar with the Games with Gold initiative. Microsoft would give away 2 or 3 games every month, just like Sony does with their PlayStation Plus subscription. Xbox One titles would be active for as long as you kept your membership alive, but Xbox 360 games were yours to keep, even if you let your membership lapse. Since these were backwards compatible, I guess that was a pretty great bonus, right? Because of this, I wound up with a random mix of games on demand and Xbox Live Arcade games that built up over the years. Some of these games have been included in earlier segments because I was extremely grateful to add them to my library. But considering there were 227 free 360 games given away from 2013 until the service ended in September 2023, I decided to lump the rest in together here because, look, I ain't gonna turn down free games, and I have no idea where else to put them. Besides, these are on my Xbox 360 now. You know, it's a real shame that the 360 storefront is going down. But on the bright side, well, I feel like I might trust Microsoft the most of the big three when it comes to keeping these digital games accessible and supported with future hardware. They've already put in quite a bit of work to ensure that people can still play games from even the first Xbox with an assortment of modern trappings. After all of this, I feel even more confident in saying that looking at the games on my Xbox 360's hard drive provides an interesting snapshot of the lessons learned and unlearned in the video game industry since 2005. As the store silently goes into the night on July 29th, 2024, its final lesson is perhaps the most important. Nothing lasts forever.